So to go from our default file structure to a point where we're completing the goals that we outlined before, we'll need to go ahead and figure out a way to set up a single entry point for our entire app. And that's where this app directory is actually going to come into play. And this is just kind of an idea of where we're going to go with everything. You can see up here, Android directory, exactly the same as what we had in the default file structure. The same applies for iOS, index.ios.js, index.android.js, and all the other files. The only difference that we'll be making is this application directory, or app directory, which has just a few directories in there and one file, and we'll run through what each of those means and what they do. So first up is our app/components directory. And in there, this directory kind of aligns with our goals to maximize code reuse and minimize component state. In this directory, we'll be writing mostly functional components that can be used in multiple places throughout our app. So we can see here things like button, an avatar, a text input, a loading indicator. So this is an example of what's coming from the React Native Meteor boilerplate that I've put together. And I just want to give a little explanation of what's actually going on in these directories. So we can see that each directory has an index.js. And this file manages what's exported to kind of the outside world, to our different directories, wherever we're calling these components. It's the only file that we'll require. So when we're using, say, avatar in a different directory, we can say, import avatar from component/avatar/ well, that's it, from component/avatar. And then that index.js will figure out what's actually being exported as default, just kind of our named exports and so on. And then next up, we've got the actual avatar.js file. And that's going to be the actual component for this directory. Like I outlined before, this is going to be a functional component, which means it's just a function of the props that are passed to it from the parent component that's actually calling it and using it. And then finally, we've got the styles directory, basically the styles. So we'll create a style sheet, we'll import that from the avatar or any other components in that directory, and we'll just keep one location to keep those styles. Now you may be thinking this is overkill, and I won't disagree with you. And something like the avatar directory, the button, and so on, this is overkill. But the reason I've laid it out like this is I've found that working on projects with multiple people for multiple months, this is an organization that scales well and keeps things easy to understand, organize, and just work with in general. Now you may also be asking, why are we breaking the styles out of the component directory, or the component file itself? And the reason for that is just so we can reuse code as much as possible. I found that as you're working on a component or a series of components, you're going to reuse a lot of those styles. So instead of, kind of complicated imports from various different files, let's just keep all of the styles in a single directory within that component. That way we always know where to look, and we can reuse code in the most efficient manner. This really makes sense once you start building out components that are composed of multiple smaller components, such as in generic text input, where we have two different components in there. So that's the reason we're going ahead and breaking those styles out into a separate directory. So next up, we have app/config. And this directory aligns with our goal to keep configuration out of the code. It's kind of in the name of that directory itself. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to keep anything that's used in multiple places throughout our app in one easy to access and change place. This is just an example of, again, from my React Native Meteor boilerplate, of what we're keeping in there. So you can see that we've got like an images.js file, and that's going to manage paths to various images in our app. We've got a routes file. Again, it's going to manage our routes. Settings, it's going to keep things like our server URL, feature toggles, dev toggles, so on. And then we've also got styles.js, which is just going to be like global styles throughout our app. Things like branding, colors, that's what we're keeping in that styles directory, or that styles file. And the reason for this is it gives us one easy place to go and manage our various configuration items. Another benefit of it is it's very nice for when people who aren't familiar with code in general, with React Native, people like designers who can then go ahead and jump in and swap out something like the logo very easily. And they just have to touch a minimal amount of code. Just have to update the images path or just go ahead and drop that new file in. So it's not as intimidating for someone like a designer to jump in there and make those quick little branding changes, logo image changes, and so on. And that's one of the reasons we're keeping these configuration files together. So here we've got the app/images directory. This is a really short and simple one, and it aligns with our goal to maximize code reuse and, to some extent keep configuration out of the code. In the app/images directory, I'm going to keep all of my images. You can organize them however makes sense for you, however works with the way you think. But basically the goal here is to keep all the images in one place so they're easy to swap out, and again, not intimidating if someone like a designer wants to jump into the project, swap out an icon, swipe out a logo. I want to keep it in one place where it's not intimidating and, they don't have to worry about breaking anything, and I don't have to worry about anything breaking. So here we've got app/layouts. And this layouts directory doesn't really align with any single goal, but the purpose here is to give us an idea of the different experiences a user may expect in our app. I use it mostly as for developer happiness and like a sanity check, and just to keep things easy to understand. For example, an app may have like an off layout, an admin layout, and just a general app layout or when somebody's logged in. These directories themselves are actually organized very similar to the apps component or the app components directory, or as we'll see in a little bit, the app routes directory. So we've got our index file, our actual component file, our styles file. And then what I'm actually doing in these layout files is setting up things like global navigation for that layout. So something like a tab or a menu. That's what I'm setting up here, and just kind of bringing in the routes for this, just getting all these basic configuration type items out of the way. Okay, so here we've got our app lib directory. Again, it's a very simple one, short, sweet, and to the point. And this directory aligns with our goal to maximize code reuse and write in a cross-platform way. We're just going to keep any general functions here. This doesn't have to be React specific, React Native specific, any of that. It's just going to be general functions. So here I've got like string.js1 where I can capitalize the first letter of a word. In reality, most of the functions that you keep inside of this lib directory you can probably find as an npm module somewhere out there. So just keep that in mind. But if there's any just general functions that you'll want to use throughout the app that don't really tie specifically to any single component, keep those here in this lib directory just so you've got that one place to go look for them. All right, so here we've got the app routes directory, and this is really like the bread and butter of the app. This is, our app is made up of a series of routes or screens or scenes, whatever you want to call them. And the goal of this directory is to, maximize the code reuse we're using and to write in a cross-platform way. So the app routes directory is set up in a very similar way again to the app components directory or app layouts directory. And the only difference here is that we've got this container file. And the goal of this container file is to actually fetch and manage our data. That's going to allow us to, continue to use these stateless functional components as much as possible, because we've got this one file that's dedicated to fetching and managing data for this specific route. And then the reason I'm keeping something like details.js, which hopefully will be a stateless functional component, the reason I'm keeping this here is just so I'm co-locating things as much as possible. I know that this details.js file is basically going to be the view side of things for the details route, and I want to keep that as close as I can to the actual container that fetches and manages its data. Okay, finally, the last thing we've got in our app directory is our actual index.js file. And this is going to serve as our entry point into this cross-platform app. Basically, all it's doing here is setting up an entry point that we can require from index.ios.js and index.android.js and display our application, which is going to be very similar on both platforms, in one easy to use place where we don't have to make changes for both Android and iOS, just to actually get our app loaded and running. And then one final thing I want to kind of drive home is that in some way or another, each and every directory and file is contributing to writing a cross-platform app. App/index.js just serves as that starting point, that entry point that index.iOS and index.android can actually go ahead and call. But each and every directory file is going to contribute to the sense of building a cross-platform app.